Kyra, look! Look! I can't get a pulse.
On this episode of Old Joe's Reminiscence, when Verdon is shot in a guerrilla ambush, Galen and Burke risk being captured trying to get him the medical help he needs. The Surgeon episode of the Planet of the Apes television series debuted on October 25, 1974. Although it was the 7th episode to air on the CBS television network, it was the 9th in production order at 20th Century Fox Studios. Put together with The Interrogation, it became the first half of the 1980 television movie Life, Liberty, and Pursuit on the Planet of the Apes. From a glance at the cast list, it appears that Mark Leonard is back in this one. He's Urko, of course, and Booth Coleman returns as the orangutan Zaius. I'm sure Urko was quite annoyed when Verdon and the other captives were gone when he'd returned to the castle at the end of episode 5. I don't recall watching this episode in 1974. I was probably watching Chico and the Man. So, I've avoided looking up any more to avoid spoilers. Based on the title, I'm guessing that something happens to one of the main characters, something that will require surgery. If you haven't seen the episode, try to take a look before I start putting up spoilers, because I'm going in for an exploratory of The Surgeon. The episode begins with a slight twist. Typically, they open with Verdon, Burke, and Galen continuing on their cross-country journey. But in this one, we see 3 guerrillas on horseback. They discover the 3 fugitives, and 2 of those guerrillas dismount to pursue their quarry on foot. The guerrillas take up positions and fire their rifles. The first shot hits some rocks directly in front of Burke, but the second shot hits its mark and Verdon goes down. The apes return to their horses and ride off without finishing the job. Burke hoists Verdon up to perform a fireman's carry. Galen leads them to a cave where Burke tends to Verdon's wounds. The consensus is that they need to get Verdon to a hospital.
Our Blue Cross expired about 1,000 years ago.
Galen mentions a medical center outside of Central City. Unless they've doubled back, Central City should be quite a distance off. And even if they did make it to the medical center, what would entice the ape doctors to help a human? Especially one who's been shot.
Look, even if we do get him in there, the apes don't exactly reserve their best medical treatment for humans.
I know the chief surgeon. She'll help us.
Galen thinks that a doctor named Kyra, his friend and former fiancée, will help them. He says that he knows a back way into the city. This seems like a trap. Did those gorillas intentionally wound the human just to lure the doctor out? At the medical center, returning guest star Jacqueline Scott, who had played the chimpanzee farm wife Zantes in episode 4, The Good Seeds, appears here as the surgeon Kyra. Now, the role of Kyra was originally offered to Kim Hunter. If you'll recall, she played Zira in the first 3 Planet of the Apes films. And if you watched my treatment of the original film starring Charlton Heston, you may remember that Miss Hunter wasn't very fond of sitting through her ape makeup application. In fact, she had to take a Valium every morning just to get through the ordeal. In this scene, Kyra's upset that her patient has died, even though her superior tells her that the operation was a success. The director, Dr. Leander, is played by Martin Brooks, in the first of his 2 Planet of the Apes series appearances.
Martin Brooks was born Martin Baum in the Bronx on November 30, 1925. His family moved to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania when Martin was 10 years old. He was a paratrooper assigned to the Pacific Theater with the 11th Airborne Division during World War II. He attended Penn State University after the war, and he attended a dramatic workshop in New York City. He started appearing on network television during the early days of New York broadcasts in the 1950s. He made the migration to Hollywood and continued his television career with guest appearances throughout the 1960s and 70s. Martin is best remembered as Dr. Rudy Wells in the popular 1970s series The $6 Million Man and its spin-off The Bionic Woman. He reprised the role in several made-for-TV movies. He was also Dr. Arthur Bradshaw in 23 episodes of General Hospital in 1981. Martin Brooks died in Los Angeles at the age of 90 years old on December 7, 2015.
The director slyly invites Kyra to dinner at his place.
Is attendance mandatory?
If this scene hadn't been filmed in the 1970s, there might have been a call placed to HR following this exchange. Kyra enters her office so absorbed in what's on her chart that she doesn't notice Galen lurking in the corner of the room.
Hello, Kyra. As simple as that. Just to remind me.
When Galen says that he needs her help, Kyra responds that Galen is a criminal and a traitor.
Oh, come on now, you don't really believe that. What else would I believe?
Doesn't she? She seems fairly convinced to me. She even threatens to call the police on him. And when he reminds her that the police would kill him, she insists that they'd be doing justice. Ooh, that's harsh.
I loved you. But to hear you say those words now, I'm sorry I came.
Galen?
She asks him what happened to change him, and then I suddenly had a realization that I must be getting old and senile, because I can't seem to remember what happened in an episode that I just reviewed a few months ago.
I discovered that humans and apes are supposed to be equals, not masters and slaves.
Do you really believe that?
Oh, yes.
Galen returns to the cave with disguises and a plan. They ambush a wagon. Galen lets the human escape, but Burke knocks the wind out of the gorilla, played by Ron Stein, who returns to play 2 different roles in this episode. It's his 4th of 11 appearances. I wonder what Burke did to the gorilla afterward. Surely he didn't kill him. That night at Director Leander's place, Kyra seems a bit preoccupied. They're interrupted by an intern who announces the arrival of Dr. Adrian, who's actually Galen in disguise. The intern is Dr. Stoll, played by David Naughton. Now, it's his first ever screen appearance, and David is the younger brother of James Naughton, who plays astronaut Peter Burke in the series. This is the only instance of the 2 brothers appearing together. Kyra excuses herself and proceeds to meet with the disguised fugitives. She instructs a human orderly, Traven, to make room for the newcomers. Traven is played by Michael Strong.
Manhattan-born Michael Strong came into the world as Cecil Notopov on February 8, 1918. The son of a Russian Jewish couple, Cecil grew up in the Bronx. He was a member of the Varsity Dramatic Society at Brooklyn College, where he graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree. He did radio and local theater, which led to Broadway and a contract with Paramount Pictures. With his background, many of the characters Michael played were New Yorkers. He did many more television appearances than he did films. One of his most memorable roles was as Dr. Roger Corby in the Star Trek episode What Are Little Girls Made Of? He's also known for playing Brigadier General Hobart Carver in the epic war film Patton. Michael Strong died at the age of 62 on September 29, 1980.
Leander is watching with curiosity from his window above the courtyard. Traven puts them in a large communal room with the other humans, but Burke insists that Verdon get a room of his own. That just isn't done here. They argue about it until Traven gives in. Later, at dinner, Burke starts complaining about the food. And that gets me wondering what they've been doing for food while they're on the run. If it's better than what they're eating here, then he should be thankful. And if it's not, he should just shut up. He's drawing attention to himself, and I think one of the others is getting suspicious. Burke is then chastised for talking to their pretty young servant, who happens to be Traven's daughter. He's told that the servant has no name. I remember seeing Jamie Smith Jackson in the TV movie Go Ask Alice.
Jamie Smith Jackson was born Jamie Louise Smith in Missouri on March 28, 1948. Jamie made a name for herself in 1973 when she appeared with her long blonde hair in the made-for-TV movie Go Ask Alice. She would go on to make guest appearances on dozens of television series. They included a couple of roles on episodes of The Rookies. In 1983, Jamie married Michael Ontkeen, who played Officer Willie Gillis on that series. In the mid-1990s, Jamie gave up acting in favor of home interior design. She is currently the director of Jamie Jackson Interior Design in Honolulu.
When Burke continues to be flippant, a man across the table speaks up.
The girl is his daughter.
He's Jordo, played by Phil Montgomery, who played a dozen or so bit parts in the years 1967 through 1979. Meanwhile, Galen and Kyra discuss their options. She says that she doesn't know enough about human anatomy to operate.
I'm a surgeon. Don't just go blundering in with a knife to see what will happen. To operate in ignorance is butchery.
Galen tells her that he's seen books on human anatomy.
In Zeus's study.
In Act 2, Director Leander enters Kyra's office. I think Galen has gotten himself in a little over his head by pretending to be a doctor in this one. He criticizes their use of surgery, even saying that he prefers leeches. After Leander leaves, Galen doubles down, promising to get that book.
I will get you that book. With that in your hands, you can advance our medicine. Oh, that book is life.
If we are caught, it means death.
Meanwhile, Verdon is feverish and having hallucinations. Burke hears the servant girl scream as she's being beaten by a man named Laugher, played by Ron Stein, who's out of his gorilla costume for once. He's punishing the girl for spilling some water. During his fight with Laugher, Burke accidentally drops his knife. Traven tells Galen that humans aren't allowed to carry knives. We cut to Orko's office, where Ron Stein is back in the gorilla costume to tell his story about Burke's ambush of the wagon. Orko says that the guerrillas who shot Verdon reported that the fugitives were heading away from Central City in the mountains to the north. So I guess Burke and Galen hijacked that cart far away from where the cave was located so that they confused the apes even further. Orko's subordinate in this scene is Captain Cleon, whose actor isn't listed in the credits or on IMDb, but another source lists him as actor Peter Ireland. If he is Peter Ireland, he returns in episode 9. But keep in mind that this is the 9th episode in production order, so maybe that's a mistake. Orko is suspicious. He cancels a trip so he can be around for a few days, just in case the astronauts come back to Central City. We cut to Galen and Verdon taking a cart out. At a checkpoint, Galen says that they are on an emergency response to the home of Zeus, saying that the orangutan has suffered a heart attack. The gorillas offer to escort them, something I'm sure Galen had not anticipated. Back at the medical center, Verdon is still suffering from his fevered hallucinations. and Dr. Kyra is tending to him.
No!
No, calm yourself. It's Dr. Kyra.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was having a bad dream.
She explains that she has no feelings for Galen or the humans, but Verdon's surgery might advance their surgical knowledge. It would be useful for operating on their ape species. She leaves and Traven creeps in. He always seems to be listening. On the wagon, Burke looks nervous about having the gorilla escorts with them as they pull up to Zaius' residence. Galen talks the gorillas into guarding their cart while he and Burke enter the residence alone. Burke uses his knife to open the cabinet where the book resides. They pull a bust of an orangutan from its pedestal and use pillows to form a body under a blanket to fool the gorillas. I was wondering how that was going to work, but we don't get to see it. They cut to Dr. Kyra flipping through that book back at her office. She's skeptical about its source.
If Zaius knew about it, why didn't he let us know?
Political reasons.
Traven comes in with word about Verdon.
Come in.
Dr. Adrian's servant is very sick.
Verdon is getting worse. Kyra says that the bullet must have moved closer to a nerve. She says that if she tries to operate, there will be too much blood loss. And they've had no success with blood transfusions in the past. Burke says that the donor used must not have been compatible, and that there's a blood test to find a compatible donor. Verdon's blood is the rarest type, AB negative, because of course it is. They take samples from all of the humans, including the girl with no name.
I trust you.
We cut to a lab where they've determined that there are only 2 compatible donors. A woman who's there with them was added to this scene. She had been cut from a previous scene. She's Brigid, played by Diana Hale. She was married to Michael Forrest, Apollo, from the Star Trek episode Who Mourns from Adonais. She appeared as Athena, Apollo's wife, when he reprised his role for the fan-produced Star Trek Continues episode, Pilgrim of Eternity. Of the 2 eligible donors, one is the guy who Burke had beat up earlier, but he's run off. The other is that off-cast girl. She refuses, saying that she can't give her blood because she's evil.
I killed my brother.
In an earlier experiment, her blood was used for a transfusion to her brother, who had died shortly afterward. Well, Burke explains that her blood was incompatible, and that's why the brother died. But her blood is compatible with Verdon's. We cut to her getting prepped for the transfusion, with the operation about to get underway. Just then, Dr. Leander walks in. Oops. Now, we've heard the apes call humans liars, but Galen is as good a liar as any human who had ever lived, if you ask me. Leander recognizes the girl. A blood transfusion from her in the past was a failure. But Galen, hamming it up in his role as Dr. Adrian, convinces the doctor that he's come up with a new process. Dr. Leander decides to assist. Galen insists that the doctor wear a mask for this surgery. And while he's tying it behind the doctor's head, Leander notices Burke trying to hide that book on human anatomy. As the final act begins, Dr. Leander directs the fake Dr. Adrian to clamp off a bleeding blood vessel, and Galen makes an excuse and asks Dr. Leander to demonstrate. Kyra announces that she can't get the bullet out. Leander tells her that there's no way of removing it and that she'd better close up.
Make a second incision, 3 inches below the first. We'll try to get at the bullet from below the entry point.
What is he saying? Who is he?
To my orderly.
An orderly giving instructions to Dr. Kyra?
He wants to see the book. Rather than let him go to the authorities, Galen stops the doctor from leaving. Leander asks Kyra if they forced her to operate.
No,
Then why?
I'm a doctor.
He says that the book is treason.
The book is madness!
That book exists. And to deny what exists is madness.
Then the girl swears that Verdun will die. It can't get much worse than this, can it? Urko is at the Zaius house, investigating the break-in. He says that Zaius should have burned those books long ago.
One day, these books will serve us.
They will enslave us, Zeus, and the process has already begun. Look, Zeus. One of them is missing.
Back at the medical center, the surgery to remove that bullet continues.
Fascinating.
Then Verdun goes into respiratory arrest. Burke begins CPR, and Dr. Leander administers an oral stimulant. Verdun's heart starts beating again, and he begins breathing on his own as well. Dr. Kyra finally has the bullet out, and they begin to close. Then Burke tells the girl that she no longer has to worry about having evil blood. They hear horses. Urko and his gorillas are approaching. Urko stops a human in the compound.
You!
Me?
Yes, you. Come here.
Yes, sir.
We're looking for 2 humans and a renegade ape.
The part of that human was played by Raymond Mayo, who played dozens of bit parts in his career, including 7 appearances on Adam 12. He had originally had more lines, but they were cut. Urko then asks Traven where the fugitives are. He says he doesn't understand. Then Dr. Leander comes out and tells Urko to keep it down because he's disturbing the patients. Urko asks him where the astronauts are.
Astronauts are here.
Astronauts?
As 2 humans. 2 humans, special humans, different.
Leander then warns Urko to leave to avoid exposure to the Black Death.
When the strangers heard of it, they fled. Of course, if your duty compels you to search the hospital.
Leander returns to the operating room, where Kyra asks why he helped the fugitives.
I was afraid they might take you along with them. And we have a date for tonight. Besides, if they had searched further, they might have found that.
We cut to Burke, Traven, and his daughter loading Verdun onto a wagon. Verdun says he can't leave without knowing the name of the girl who saved his life.
My name is Arna.
Arne. Thank you, Arne. Goodbye.
Bye.
Traven is going with them to drive the plague cart, but he promises Arna that things will be different when he returns. Galen and Dr. Kyra say their goodbyes, and the 3 friends are off to find more adventures on the planet of the apes.
I was thrilled at the opening scene when they were finally depicting at least one gorilla who could hit a target. But I have to say that I was brutally disappointed that the one aiming at Burke missed by so much. Then, when those gorillas got back on their horses without even trying to get a second shot, that like to drive me insane. They should have finished the job. It was a pure display of complete incompetence.
My first question while watching this, and something that nagged at me throughout the first few acts, was what was the guerrillas' mission when they wounded Verdun? Because they failed to follow up by tracking down the fugitives. It didn't make any sense. I might have been more satisfied if they'd shown them riding past the cave opening. But on further reflection, I guess that cave was on a soundstage, and bringing the horses in would have been time and cost prohibitive. But the way it was shown, it seemed as if they just merely rode off, satisfied with themselves. They reported to headquarters that the astronauts and Galen were headed north from Central City. Now, since we already know that they went west to Oakland and the Bay Area, and then south along the Pacific coast, this episode would have made more sense a bit earlier in the season. When they were trying to find a compatible blood donor for Verdun, Burke stated that statistically, there is a 1 in 10 chance of finding a donor. In reality, less than 1% of the population has AB negative blood. But people with negative A, B, or O types can be donors, so there's about a 1 in 6 chance of finding a compatible donor for AB negative blood. Therefore, finding 2 donors out of the 12 humans seemed to work out. In the one scene in Kyra's office, I noticed that Dr. Leander's makeup wasn't the best. His mouth didn't seem to move when he spoke. There was an additional character in the credits. When I looked up Raven Gray Eagle on IMDb, one role appeared over and over in his scores of listed appearances, and that role was minor role uncredited. Maybe he was the human who ran off during the cart hijacking. I'm not really sure. He appeared in 4 episodes of Planet of the Apes, beginning with this episode, The Surgeon. Production was only a few weeks behind the actual air dates. The ratings for the 2nd episode came in during filming of some scenes of this episode in the mountains. Planet of the Apes was 43rd up against Sanford and Son at number 3 and the number 1 show, Chico and the Man. I have to say The Surgeon was interesting, but it wasn't one of the strongest episodes in my opinion. What did you think? Let me know in the comments. Also, be sure to like and subscribe. Tap the notification bell to be sure you get notified when I publish my next video. And I'll see you here on Old Joe's Reminiscence.